Welcome back. The next session, we have a panel session with three panelists, but we're looking for your assistance on this session. So this should be something that everyone in this room has got both experience of and knowledge of. It's the interaction between academia and practitioners in the areas of information retrieval, AI, and search. And I've chaired lots of panel sessions before, and I've usually prepared lots of questions. But I don't think in this time we're going to need any questions prepared from past experience. So our three panelists, we've chosen a range of people. Sami is a freelancer software engineer and currently studying for a doctorate. Steve has a PhD and is now working in the commercial sector in NLP. And Martin, as you know, has been a consultant on research strategies for many, many years. So we've got three contrasting viewpoints. The way we're structuring it is we're going to ask each participant to just introduce themselves briefly, 5 minutes. Then the panelists can ask questions. Then we'll throw it open to the audience and get your contributions. And then finally, we round up with each of the panelists in turn. So without further ado, Sami, start.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Sami. Nice to meet you all. I'm actually a first-year PhD student at Udo Kruschitz's chair in Regensburg, Germany. And I'm also a part-time freelancer in the area of search and NLP. Currently, helping a client evaluate the usefulness of large language models in the area of systematic reviews. But in my PhD, I'm mostly exploring the limits of the knowledge that these models have in domain-specific contexts. Currently, I picked the biomedical context because it's relevant to my work sample. And looking how we can augment these models with the relevant right knowledge during inference, so they can overcome these knowledge gaps that they have. But my professional background, so I worked before I started my PhD. I mostly worked in enterprise search. I worked for a small company in Germany for 2 years that is an enterprise search vendor. And then later on as a freelancer for a big multinational for the enterprise search team there. And then later on as a freelancer also for some smaller companies. And one of the reasons that I also wanted to start a PhD was there was a certain lack of evaluation going on when it comes to relevancy, and there was also like a lot of innovation going on, work on hands-on projects in search, or at least in the projects that I was working on. So I'm very curious about the experience of the other panelists on the topic. And yeah, so currently with the PhD, and so I started this year, and ChatGPT basically blew up. And before ChatGPT, I wanted to look into knowledge graph construction. And now I'm more interested in like, how do we get the right information into these models and pair them with search in a way that makes an overall better system. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Steve.
Steven Zimmerman, and yeah, I've been working in this space now for 10 years. Kind of bounced back between academia and industry, and it's not a mistake that I'm sitting in the seat right now with discussions with both of them previously on kind of one of the major topics is this gap between academia and industry and evaluation, and it's it seems to be a growing gap based on my experience in industry at the moment. Is that well, industry has always liked silver bullets, and GPT is definitely being positioned as a silver bullet, and it's amazing if you just look at what people are proposing out there in the public space of what it can do. Just look at Microsoft presentations, for God's sakes, and it's very clear that this is the answer to all of our problems. But I kind of look at this like AI governance was mentioned in our last presentation. And we took it, let's look at like the pharmaceutical industry, and they have a product that it's not even a product. They discover a new chemical that they know could work, could address problems. And they actually just throw it out there tomorrow because it's the latest and greatest. It solves aging, for instance. And there's in that example, there is very clear set guidelines for how we will test this, evaluate this, and actually even produce it and operationalize the product. And then there's an information sheet that's provided to the purchaser of their products that provides, okay, well, these are the odds, these are the risks, these are the benefits of the product we're providing. But I don't see any of that in the products that are currently being released out in the market. And in my experience testing out in the industry setting, I'm playing with Copilot a bit, and it generally does some impressive things. Like, I don't know if anyone here is using Copilot for Microsoft 365, but like for meeting summarization, it's great. But like other areas, email generation, let's take that as an example. It can miss information, or it can hallucinate. It still can hallucinate, and I don't know. There are certain areas in industry where I think this is like in industrial settings, you get a product sheet. Even I use pharma as an example, but there's other products that go through a certification process, and I still have yet to see anything like this in place. Yes, OpenAI likes to talk about how we're making it ethically safe and so forth. But I still have yet to see that, and there's tons of opportunity for academia to work with industry in this space. I should also add that I am a bit biased here because my PhD was funded by the ESRC to look at ethics in AI. That's basically what it's about, human rights issues. So I am, and I'm very interested in understanding how humans behave in these settings. There's more than ample research done on traditional search, demonstrating all of the issues that humans have. And in my PhD, it was like looking at how do we mitigate in traditional settings. There's like information set and informational cues. Like these are things that are being proposed to kind of mitigate the issues of bad information or potentially risky information. And now we have this new technology which condenses it, and it's very confident in itself. And yeah, are people getting the full picture? Do they understand it? I think there was Charlie asked a question earlier during our first speakers session, and I think there's examples not just with teenagers. We had a lawyer in the U.S. who who submitted a brief with totally fake information. Got in trouble for it, got caught, thankfully. But I mean, those are just some examples out there. I leave it there. I think there's. I hope I've given enough examples there to say that
There's some scope.
there's some scope for.
I mean, let's go back to the fundamentals of information retrieval, because it's basically about finding ways to meet the requirements of information-seeking people. That's not information retrieval. It's an old discipline. It goes back to the early 1950s. But that presupposes that we can identify what the requirements are and that we can judge whether or not those requirements have been met. That's fundamental bit of the science, if you like. Now, since the early mid-1950s, around about 100,000 research papers have been published on information retrieval. When it comes to enterprise search, which is the area that I've been in since 1976, I go back that far. The papers that matter have been written by people in this room. And that's Marianne and her team from Denmark, and Paul and his team from Scotland. Let's be sure where you actually nationals, right? And that's total, perhaps in total, a couple of papers. I know you've got more on the way, Marianne. Paul, I think about half a dozen papers in all. Right. So 100,000 information retrieval and about 10 on enterprise focus of information retrieval. And that really worries me, because how do people know how people in the enterprise search? My experience is largely information foraging. It's, you know, people get in and work their way around and use all sorts of stuff. And they're not information deficit. Everyone in an enterprise has far too much information anyhow. So it's not as if they're searching for, oh, I wonder what. It's usually sitting somewhere on a desktop. But this really worries me, because I see vendors promising magic solutions that will meet all the needs of the enterprise. The question is, how do they know what life is like inside the enterprise? Because when you look at the boards of directors of these companies, they've never worked in an enterprise outside the IT business. They've never been in a pharma company. They've never been in a telecoms company. They don't know what it's like in there. They also don't know what it's like to work in a company which may have 20 different languages. And when you come to pharma, all those information sheets, Steve, are written in local language. And if you want to find the one that's Tagish in Indonesia, you've got to have a search engine that does Tagish. So I've got a real problem at the present moment. Why is the information research community, why is the academic community ignoring the enterprise? And it's unique to this particular discipline, because this year I published a book on workarounds in IT. The big areas of workarounds are enterprise systems, like enterprise resource planning systems, which don't work. And in the medical area, enterprise electronic healthcare record systems. And there are about 1,000 papers collectively where academics have done deep dives into hospitals and into enterprises of all sides, all around the world, to understand why these systems don't work. And they're usually a function of the information problems that people have because of information flows through those systems. But on the information retrieval side, no research other than in this room. What I'm going to say is that, does that matter? Are we happy with the status quo? Or do we think there should be more synergy between the two? And if so, how do we get there? And I speak not just as a consultant. I've been a visiting professor at the Information School in Sheffield for 20 years now. And my whole reason for being there is to challenge the academics. I'm actually told, come in and argue with them. And I think they'd be pleased to know when eventually I go away and do something else, because they're very nice people. But that's my concern. And I think it's all three of us. There are huge opportunities, but somehow there's no research, particularly on evaluation, to help us build better systems. So, you know, what's going to happen in the future? What do you think, Steve? You know, because I mean, you brought evaluation up. I mean, that was your key thing, Sammy, wasn't it? As we sort of just chat amongst ourselves for a minute, because evaluation is everything. And yet, you know, every week I actually do look at archive and I look at all those papers, and every week there's about 100 on IR. None of them are on evaluation in what I broadly call the enterprise environment, I mean, including systematic reviews and e-commerce and stuff like that as well.
Sami, you mentioned evaluation. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, you said that one of your tasks was working with a commercial organization to evaluate some tool. Maybe you could talk about the extent to which that worked or didn't work.
Yeah, it was more like the impression that I had is that there's a bit of like reliance on expert knowledge. So you have these systems, you basically have some experts who know how they should behave, but there's not like a methodical way where you say, or not often, like apparently there are some companies who actually do it. So they build up evaluation data set and methodically evaluate their enterprise search systems. But most of the time, my impression was that it's not done like that. It's just, okay, we see how it works. We compare it with maybe the state before, and then we just say, okay, this feature now works. It's fine. Move on. And I don't know why that. So probably resource constraints in a way, but then also, yeah, like relevance tuning is not that big. It's more about getting the data there, getting the data in the right format, making sure that it's consistent across systems. These are more like the technical challenges where most of the energy goes in.
Someone going to challenge me?
Can you is this also your impression, or do you have other impressions?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think one of it's quite interesting looking at the paper I'm referring to is by Marianne Lieke. I hope I pronounced your family name correctly. And it was published 2021.
Yeah.
And it was a deep dive into a Danish biochemical company. What was interesting was it was mixed methods. It was search logs, it was surveys, it was interviews. There's a strong ethnographic element to it. And when you look at the citations to those papers, there's only 4, and 2 of them are about the mixed methods approach, not actually about the subject. So I'm seeing what papers there are, and also, Paul, the work that you've done, relatively low citation counts, is that no one's picking up on this and saying, hey, this is a good, well, let's take it to another stage. Can we do more? So you've got these one-offs, and the issue is, do they scale? Is it just the company that you did is unique? And the same with yours, Paul. I mean, have you ever seen anyone sort of think about the scaling, whether it's applicable across a broader area?
Yeah, I admit there's not a lot of research in the area, and I think maybe the difference is a lot of research is quite reductionist. It's quite narrow. So a lot of IR research is very, very specific. But if you go into an organization, it's a social construct. It's a complex system. So if you want to look at how something works or doesn't work, you have to consider many, many different elements. So much more of a systems view. So you have to do mixed methods. You have to cast a wide net. And there's just not a lot of research in our area like that.
I mean, one of the surprising things I found, I wasn't surprised, but it was nice to have confirmation when you look at Marianne's paper, is that I think off the top of my head, 48% of the queries were for people. And do you mean people use our search engine for people? Yeah. Well, we've not seen them on the top 10 results. No, because in enterprise, the long tail is million miles long. But the people who've only done 5 searches for that particular person, those 5 searches may have helped them enormously in developing a new product. But you can't tell that because no one looks beyond about the first 100. And yet the search logs typically get down to 10,000 in terms of a rank from 1 out of 10,000. So it is a big scale problem. Man, could I invite you? Could you tell the audience a little bit about your work? And you may like to turn around if I may ask. And
I'll sit over there.
But I think I would like to address why we don't see this research in enterprises. And I think there are at least 2 reasons. Enterprises, they are not inviting us to come into their world because of competitive reasons, and they don't want to have their practices or their topics or their research published. And in order for a researcher to publish, we need to explain all these details in a paper. So I have had the luck that I have been an academic for many, many years, but I have also worked in the industry. So still they are once in a while inviting me in because they have some concrete work they would like to investigate. That is one reason. And I think at least in Denmark, in the Danish context, to get research funding, the funds in Denmark, even though they are actually the big industries in Denmark, they are not funding enterprise problems. They are funding societal problems, which I understand very well. So if we talk about information retrieval, then it's information retrieval in hospitals, but not in an enterprise, because the enterprise themselves can pay for this research. It's understandable, but it's a fact. So for instance, when Tanya and I would like to get more to get funding to follow up on our research, we can't get it. I have been into contact with several of the big funds in Denmark, and they are not interested. So that was some of the explanation of it, not a lot of research in enterprises.
Udo, can I pick on you?
Yeah, I was about to ask. Yeah,
You've written a book on the subject. Not many of us have. Yeah, actually, 3 of the authors of books are also in this room. But is there a similar situation in Germany? And I'm thinking of Sami's research. Do you find similar barriers of funding to do this type of research?
that's an interesting question. Let me answer a different question. I just don't know enough about it. But what I wanted to say is some of the things that were mentioned actually just resonated. For example, our book, so Charlie and we just wrote this survey, enterprise search survey. And if you look at the citation count, it's only companies that actually ever reference it. So it's only people who are probably working on enterprise search. We have people from Google, Microsoft, and that's about it. And me every now and then referencing it, but that's about it. So it's out there, but it doesn't really interest anybody, which is interesting. I just found out today, however, that our book has been used over many years in teaching at Aalborg, which is good. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say, or that I found interesting when Sami said resource issue. I remember, I don't know whether it was you or whether it was Charlie, I think it was you who in some of these annual surveys who said, well, companies spend a lot of money on getting their results in Google up and sort of search engine optimization stuff. They spend tons of money, but then there's usually just half a person in charge of enterprise search. So you don't have the dedication to enterprise search, which of course is a starting point, which makes it difficult to actually do anything about it in the company. And I think, I mean, I have never worked in industry, but this is something which I remember from I think year after year, so the same sort of finding.
Yeah, I think it's just enterprise search may be a specific example with a number of papers, but I mean across AI more generally, I mean which is very mainstream. I worked in an AI startup, and we had, like many startups, we had a tool which did clever stuff, or maybe clever stuff, and I remember suggesting at one point that we should get a paper to measure the result of it and compare it with other tools. And when I said it would take 6 months, they said, "You must be joking. You don't have 6 months. In any case, would it increase sales?" So, I think there's across the industry there seems to be and as earlier talks have suggested, the arrival of ChatGPT hasn't been these things just arrived. They haven't been sort of evaluated, they're sort of measured. So the issue is not just in enterprise search. The sort of are the academic tools actually delivering the sort of the kind of results that will be beneficial for the as you described in pharma.
I mean, picking up something that Marianne is saying and adding to it is one of the challenges we've had at Sheffield thinking about this is that the average PhD is 3 years. maybe nearer 4 by the time you've done the pre-work and whatever. And in the space of 3 years, the business you've chosen to work on could have changed beyond all recognition. It could have sold off a bit. It could have changed its business direction. The CIO may have gone away from being supportive to being absolutely negative. Not a surprise. But it's a real challenge for someone to do a PhD project because so much changes in the course of those 3 years that they may find that this invalidated the research. I mean, Steve, do you think that's a problem from your perspective?
I think that, well, from my perspective, one of the main problems is, yes, okay, 3 years, huge change. I mean, where I currently am, I mean, there's huge change, leadership change, and that trickles down everywhere. And I think also, like, for the most part, in industry, a lot of these solutions are IT driven. They sit off in their own world and trying to get just to even, there's kind of this agreement between the non-IT folks who you're trying to serve, IT folks, and okay, well, where does a scholarly study even fit into that picture? They don't, that's kind of a distraction from it. My view is that on this specific topic is that you could argue that, like the work you're doing up in Denmark, that it would so much benefit the business if you actually look at like how you evaluate it ahead of time, rather than going out, okay, I'm going to go to IT department, they're going to go procure some third-party vendors, they're going to show their product and oh, whiz bang, this looks the best. Maybe we try it out, but it really doesn't, we haven't actually done any evaluation on it. And I think like if we actually took like a proper approach to these problems, you actually save a lot of money for not just for one company you're working with, but for industry as a whole. Amongst many of the other issues that I've discussed here as well. I think you could actually argue that it would save money in the long run.
Yeah, but then when you look at particularly the research done on both ERP and hospital systems, is that clearly the enterprise has welcomed the academics in to do the work. You know, so why is this search different? Because clearly the people running the ERP systems, the data holders, see the benefits of bringing an external consulting in to look at the implementation issues and, you know, what they could learn from. So is there a mindset that's different?
Is there a mindset different?
I mean, if I go to Denmark, there are any number of studies of the hospitals in Denmark about how they've adopted EHR. And are there issues within Denmark? Is Denmark the same as Norway? Is Denmark the same as Netherlands? And there's real openness that you almost feel is, even if a hospital doesn't come out particularly well, everyone learns from that. And so am I right in that sense? There's more of a network view of those benefits.
Yeah, should I answer that or try to? But at least I think one of you used the term that you very much search in a specific context. And I think the specific context, at least of an enterprise that I know the best, is that, for instance, in medicine, we build on previous research, but we stay more or less in the same line. It's the same disease we are investigating or the same treatment or whatever. In enterprises, and I know several of this, they have a product. The last one I worked with was enzymes. And the big thing there is, of course, to research the specific enzyme, this classical research. But the big thing in such a company is also to take a specific enzyme and put it to another industry. So from leather production and washing production to food production. So now you mentioned the search of persons. So it's actually not because they need the knowledge of that person. Yeah, yes, a specific knowledge that this person might direct the searcher to some research that was done 20 years ago in another industry, but it was skipped because it didn't give any promising result. But the searcher that is now into trying to shift again or finding a new business for a certain product can remember that a person was doing something, or he had a colleague that was doing something. So so when we investigate the more qualitative part to get explanations, we get these explanations. I need this person as a stepping stone to come further in my enterprise search and find the information. And I think the big difference in context between classical scientific retrieval is this, that in the enterprise, we go from one industry to another industry for your product. Does it make sense? So it's a different kind of searching. We call it the tracing searching in that paper, where the big thing is to find a new stone and step upon to find a new way in the enterprise system.
I would like to add also a perspective, if I may. So I have experience both in academia and in industry. I think we should also think about research and what gets published. So there may be people working or doing some evaluation in enterprise search. They may not be allowed to publish, or even if they try to publish, it gets rejected. So I think we should maybe differentiate what is publishable, allowed to publish, and we can have a big conversation why it is not published and so on. But I would say it's less about the academia. It's in academia, if you can't publish, it's not the hot topic. But it may be that some academics are doing the work, but it's just for that enterprise and it's not getting. I just wanted to bring this perspective.
I think picking up on that, I worked for a major hospital in the UK in 2 different groups. And one of the things I discovered quite early on was that the clinical staff read the closed literature. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, you will read orthopedic journals. So they're aware of academic publishing, they're aware of the strength, they're aware of what goes on.
Correct.
But a CIO hasn't got the time or the energy, and probably not the background, to look into International Journal of Information Management, Journal of Information Science, or whatever, because they're all subscription journals, they're behind a firewall, and they're probably talking a language that they're not comfortable with to translate those results into something that they could use. So that's also a part of the publishing issue.
Kind of, but I think the medical world is a bit different.
Yeah, I was using that as a
than the non-medical world.
Absolutely,
It's like it's much more competitive. You know, the medical world in many countries is like funded by the government, kind of. So I think it's a little bit different. There will be much more funding if you help the healthcare. It's more like the society type things. While if it's like a new product, blah, 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 it's different. I just wanted to do this, yeah.
Charlie.
From the practitioner perspective, maybe turning this on its head a little bit, when we're talking about academics going into research within the enterprise, for example. From the practitioner perspective, I think there are lessons we can learn from maybe the non-enterprise search use cases, web search, e-commerce search in particular, where it really matters, because e-commerce search is one of the things where if you can't find things, you can't buy it. There's a clear economic imperative to be able to measure how good your search is. And if you look at some of the big organizations doing this, they're measuring search all the time. Not always in the best way. Someone that Tony introduced me 2 years ago were measuring, I think they were measuring 10,000 queries on every few weeks, with a team of 6 or 7 people, and generating a massive spreadsheet of doom, which they then emailed to the search engineer. So can you fix all these things, please? It's amusing, but the point is there are ways of measuring how good search is, and by extension, these new AI tools as well. The trouble is within the enterprise, often people don't know this is possible, and they can't see how to translate it into the enterprise context where information is rare and unconnected, not closely linked and popular. It's stuff people have never possibly searched for ever before. That's often the problem, but you can start. You can start with 50 queries. You can get someone in the enterprise to say, how good are these results with some very simple rating mechanisms. You can generate metrics. And I have found that once you do this, you start doing this within an enterprise. If you explain it in the right way, there is an eyes open moment where people realize we can actually get numbers. We can get numbers that say how good search is today. And it's a seed. That's a small thing. 50 queries in an enterprise context can be a tiny amount of the volume, but at least you've started. And once you introduce that culture of measurement, that culture of saying we're going to test these things, we're going to see what happens when I change something in the search algorithm and what impact it has on those metrics. And executives love numbers. You can generate some things that actually relate to what they're trying to do as a business, or the tasks, the people search or the enzyme search, whatever the focus is. That can be a very transformative thing within the organization. And very often people, once we tell them this, we don't hear from them for 6 weeks because they're suddenly going, oh my God, we could do this, we could do that. And their ideas start flowing. It can be transformative if you take those lessons from web search, e-commerce search, some of the different kinds of search inside the enterprise and open their eyes. You are right that it's very difficult to then get that information out there. No enterprise likes to admit that its search isn't perfect, this business isn't perfect. And there's always the problem that they think that everything they do is so incredibly secret. If anyone else knew about it, that would be the end of the world. But there are practical ways you can get this culture inside the organization. And I'd love for the academic community to maybe look at some of these more practical methods that we are using in industry. And it may not be perfect IR practice, but it's simple methods often.
So you're suggesting
there's 50 queries.
You're suggesting that as Hong showed, the way forward with generative AI is to do just that, to comparative tests, metrics of asking similar questions and carrying out the same operations.
Yes, why not? I mean, we've got with summaries coming out of generative AI, we've got whole page judgments, we've got with the individual results coming out of vector database, we've got ways of rating individual results. Now we've got some of the tools. We mustn't be distracted by the fact that this is shiny and new to think that we can't apply some of the lessons we already have. And all this work that's gone into IR over the years, and all this work that's gone into industry practice and apply that to these new systems. We're just kind of looking at these results and going, yeah, they're right. They're sort of right. It'll do. Okay, it's amazing. It can write text. Brilliant. Should we? But no one's going to put that into an industry context and trust it. If you had some way of saying this is a good result, this is a middling result, this is a brilliant result, this is a terrible result, and some numbers around that, at least you would make a start.
I wonder whether we're thinking of doing the evaluation too much detail. What I mean by that is, since 2007, there's roughly been an annual survey of search satisfaction. How well is search working in your organization? Just at a very top level. And always the satisfaction is only about 1 in 10 of the respondents say it is very satisfactory. That's a very high level evaluation. It starts to give you a sense of what the benchmark is for a much wider group, which is, I'm thinking of Intrateam in Denmark. And FindWise, we're doing it in basically Scandinavia, but at least it's an aggregation of responses which doesn't show an individual company, but enables the search manager to go to the boss and say, so we're way down here. Do you think that's okay? In other words, all these the detail metrics, precision, relevance, multiple, whatever, is that relevant in an enterprise, or should we be looking at a more higher level search performance indicator?
My view is that those still come into play to some extent, but there's observationally there's a disconnect between or there's not enough interaction with the actual end users. We're not listening. Even in your book, you've suggested in a blog post about like having a survey a bit more detailed, like at an enterprise wide, like actually understanding what what is working, what is not working. There's very little of that out there done in this day and age. People expect Google in their enterprise. And
maybe soon ChatGPT.
and soon, well, I think it's already in a lot of enterprises.
But then, I mean, some move rules to wrap up. Julie, I wonder whether you'd like to comment on this, but does it matter? In other words, if we don't do it, would, will anyone notice? They'll just go for the next bit of hype and keep going. I mean, I'm almost wondering whether we give up. Can I take you? Julie may want to say no, and I'll come to you. But I mean, is it a solvable problem, or do we just have to put up with the fact that we just have to stab in the dark with our new LLM and see how it works?
I don't think we have to put up with it. I think we should keep asking these questions, and we should keep going back to trying to evaluate things and trying to see what they're doing. I think the problem goes though. I think it was you said earlier around the kind of the regulation though as well, isn't it? In terms of the difference between this kind of industry and something like pharma, the fact that software generally doesn't get tested in the same way that pharma does. Maybe that's in terms of putting out all of those kind of fact sheets and things. And I think that's a kind of maybe there's a much bigger problem than just kind of AI and search and enterprise search in terms of how we. It's all about profit, isn't it? Within the companies, goes back to the points you were saying about nobody wants to publish the fact that their search isn't as good as somebody else's search. So,
well, we have a world in pharma today. In today's newspaper, Bayer's share price dropped by I don't know how many percent because a test failed.
Yeah.
And that might not make the shareholders happy, but it demonstrates that the principle of sort of there's a system that that works and delivers results. It can be done.
I've always found, Peter, I'm going to just make one comment. I come to you. I've always found that the best person I could talk to in a company to get traction to improve search was the risk manager, because I went through the list of the top risks of the company with the risk manager. And most of them are information related. Is it sound? Have we found it all? Is it being used? And if the risk manager starts feeling that the risk to the company is increasing through more technology, they usually report direct into the main board, because reducing risk is usually the responsibility of the board to manage on behalf of the stakeholders. And risk managers are lonely people. They love to talk to someone who's interested in what they do. Peter, you've had a lot of experience in this area.
Hi, yeah, I think a lot of the problem that we face with things like enterprise search is the plethora of systems that each have got completely different information models. And therefore, what we've got is a complex integration problem. What we spend our time doing is using semantic tech in order to be able to bring together into a unified, federatable, extensible information model that then enables one to do things like zero copy integration. And search is part of that integration that can be done in a zero copy way once you've got an appropriate data model in place. And I think sometimes what we do in life is that we spend all our time sort of patching the problem rather than fixing the problem. And I think an awful lot of enterprises would be far better off if they did some preparatory work to the invocation of a proper enterprise search solution by sorting out, it's seed and soil. Sort out the soil first, make sure that it's well prepared for the solution that you're bringing in, and that means developing that sort of appropriate semantic model that encompasses the breadth of mess that you've got, so that you're then only addressing a sort of single model to search against.
So shall we bring this to a... What did we learn, Steve? What should we do next?
What should we do?
Apart from run this conference every month.
I mean, in my, at least in, I know in my role, I'm trying to build bridges back to academia, and it's been, well, this year's been kind of a challenge because what was it, 2 days? It was just the day after our conference last year when it was announced, I believe, or the week after.
The week
The
after,
week
yeah.
after, yes, it was the week
November.
after, and
Yeah.
it's kind of thrown a spanner into the works of my vision of like working with academia, and I will try to get back on track with them. At least that's my part. I don't know. I still hold a firm view that there needs to be some a bit more growth in this. So
So for me personally, I think it's working out, so I can work on actual problems and still participate in academia. But I think in general, and there might be some chances with development of LLM that also bring more people to the table, information retrieval, because a lot of data scientists and NLP people now discover retrieval augmented generation and look into information retrieval for the first time. Maybe we get a new community coming in, which is maybe more open to publishing papers when they work at these companies and work on these problems.
Yeah, and I think I'd pick up on that fact. I mean, I sound a bit negative, but the reality is, I think I was saying outside of a coffee, search has never been more important and have a bigger impact, and search with a small s and lots of quotes around it. And I have a sense that if you look at the hype curve, we're at the height of the technical development at the present moment. And then comes the fact that actually hasn't made the slightest bit of difference to our bottom line, to our profitability or whatever. And I think at that point, they're going to say, I think we need to look at this in a different way. And I think people will be more ready. They're not interested in having, when they're on the top of a flat curve, it's going to be fantastic. When it's not, maybe we need to reach out to people who could come up with some solutions. And I think we, as a community, we're in an ideal world, and really such solutions should be twice as big next year.
Lovely idea. Should be twice as big.
I've delivered it of 20.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Well, this is a fascinating discussion, and it's a shame to stop it here, but I think we have to move on. I'll take on board that we learned about the man in the pub, and now we've learned about seed and soil and the need for getting the environment right. So I've got some rich analogies for to take away.